really sorry in advance. It's the most wonderful time of the year, when Brazil looks to repeat, NA might be dead meat, and SI is near. It's the most devious time of the year. I need a therapist. The idea for that joke has been percolating in my brain for 2 years, since SI 2020. And no, you are not getting a full version of this. Unless somebody else wrote the rest of the lyrics. That's your challenge. Best lyrics wins. It is time to get back into invitational breakdowns, which this year are going to work a little bit differently. Because qualifiers are happening staggered and not within the same time frame, we'll do the breakdown for each region after their qualifier concludes. So we'll do APAC this week because they just finished up this weekend, LATAM next week, then Europe, then North America. Saving the best for last as always. I can't say that seriously anymore. Because there is a good chance that APAC might be better than NA this year. Asia Pacific unfortunately continues the trend of sending the least amount of teams to the big dance this year with just 4. It's DAMWON Kia, SANDBOX Gaming, CYCLOPS Athlete Gaming, and ELEVATE. But I guarantee a lot of people have at least one of these teams in their top 5 and 3 of them within their top 15. There's more contenders in this delegation than APAC has ever sent. Let's begin with DK. This roster is Katsang, Coded, Rin, Woogieman, and Yas, and it was finalized back in March of last year, but it did take a bit for them to get going. 7th in APAC North in Stage 1 didn't really set the tone for what this team was eventually going to turn into. Stage 2 is where they turned up the heat. 2nd overall, won that stage's APAC playoffs without dropping a map, and made it to the quarterfinals of the Mexico Major by upsetting NIP twice in 2 hours on the same map. If that didn't put them on people's radar, I don't know what would have. They kept that momentum rolling into Stage 3, did a lower bracket run of the Stage 3 playoffs, then found themselves 1 round away from the Sweden Major Grand Finals after winning the Group of Death and surviving the Korean Gauntlet. Technically, because they went to overtime in their semifinal match, that makes them the furthest advancing APAC team in a major siege tournament in history. Norengo made the SI semifinals in 2019, but they lost in 3 standard maps. When this team is turned on, they're explosive and they know every angle they're supposed to be watching. Yas was tied for the highest rating at the Sweden Major with Alamau of all people, and he and Rin were 2 of only 7 players to break over 100 kills in that tournament. At every international event, they continue to exceed expectations, and their rise has been nothing short of meteoric. You might think we overuse that word a little bit in showbiz, but honestly, for these guys, that is the only applicable term. They attended 2 out of the 3 LAN events that were held last year. They've got the talent, so why can't they just go win the whole thing?
Hello, Twitter. I've just purchased a new car. It's a Kia. Therefore, DAMWON Kia will win the 2022 Six Invitational.
Oh, I cursed them, that's why. SANDBOX I don't have as high expectations for, but they are still a pretty formidable opponent. The lineup of Envy Taylor, Harper, Nova, Static, and Shile has remained the same since the early months of 2020, even if the org that this team has been playing under has not remained the same. Bet C9's kicking themselves right about now for that one. Last year, they kicked things off with a bang by winning the APAC North Finals for the 2020 season, then would do the same in Stage 1 of 2021, so a lot of people think that they'd be hot going into SI. Right? They were kind of the opposite. Barely scraped into the lower bracket and got creamed by Makers to end their SI run, then slipped all the way to 7th place in Stage 2 of APAC North, and that must have been enough for C9 to decide to pull the plug, and they went back to their Mantis FPS moniker for Stage 3, which is where they finally got their heads above water last year and secured 1st place. That guaranteed that they would go to the Sweden Major, which is where SANDBOX swooped in to pick them up, and they managed to get all the way to the quarterfinals. Needless to say, it was a roller coaster of a year for these guys. They're now finding themselves playing second fiddle in Korea to Damwon, which is a position that they didn't find themselves in at all during 2020. But one, that's not necessarily a bad thing considering how good Damwon is, and two, they play a much slower, more structured style than Damwon ever could. So it makes for an interesting dichotomy between both Korean squads. They also seem like they've got a much better handle on what wasn't working during last year's SI. They look more comfortable under pressure. They got their entry problem figured out. They have a plethora of LAN experience internationally under their belts now, and I'm looking forward to see how they try to right their SI wrongs this time around. CYCLOPS are back at SI after winning the APAC closed qualifier just this weekend. There's not really much to say about that qual other than that Invictus looked somewhat toothless, Direwolves got in because the Hong Kongs actually had an underage player, and CYCLOPS laid down the law in that grand final. They dropped one map total all weekend, and it was a 7-5. The best team in this qual clearly won the thing. CYCLOPS now are also in the running for longest standing roster in Tier 1. Like, I think they and NIP both haven't made any roster moves since 2019. I'll have to go and do some research to see if anyone else has kept the exact same 5-stack for longer, but this Japanese core has pushed through everything together. Anaton, Aegator, Blackray, Gatorada, and Suzu were at the last SI, but couldn't make it out of groups. They took BDS and Empire both to overtime match point, and if they win either of those games, they probably don't get eliminated, but they just couldn't scrape it together in the end. But that didn't stop them though. First place in APAC North for Stage 2, got a good group in the Mexico Major, and look, all they had to do was win 3 rounds against Team 1 in their last game, and they'd make it to playoffs. But they only won 2. Then we had our first actual tiebreaker game in Siege history, and they lost that. Actual heartbreaker. They would end up missing out on the Sweden Major after bowing out early in the Stage 3 playoffs and would be just 10 points short of auto-qualifying for SI, so that made their run through the LCQ necessary. They played really well in the LCQ, like, to be fair. I don't think that that's going to be indicative of their performance at SI, given that they were kind of on a skid at the back end of last year, but there wasn't another APAC team more deserving of that spot based on last year's performance, so I really am happy to see them here. Underdogs be damned, they're going to light the world on fire if they bring their best at SI. And Elevate, I specifically wanted to save for last because the story of this team, for those who don't know, is some cursed shit. Elevate, the org, has been picking up a lot of different teams since the Xbox days back in 2017. They had a different American team, then a Brazilian one, then an Australian one, and then when none of those worked out, they picked up the Xavier Esports Thai roster back in April, which consisted of DCH, Napew, Sapper, Spronagiri, and AngryX, who stayed until July, but the team now has Nerix as a starter, who only turned 18 just back in September of last year. This team has always had at least 2 substitutes at all points through this year, sometimes swapping out players if they had like internet problems or otherwise couldn't play. But that starting 5 might be all they're able to get to Montreal. They won Stage 1 of APAC South and also won the whole APAC playoffs for that stage against Cloud9. Now that's important because that win gave them so many SI points that they would essentially never be in danger of dropping out of the top 16 worldwide for the rest of the year. They got to the upper bracket final of the APAC Stage 2 playoffs, then lost 2 straight best of 3s and missed the Mexico Major. They got to the upper bracket final of the Stage 3 playoffs, then lost 2 straight best of 3s and missed the Sweden Major. But all of those points they accumulated still gave them the number 8 overall position on the leaderboard despite not attending a single LAN event last year. I'm not saying that their position at SI is undeserved, but they earned more than half of their points just from winning the Stage 1 playoffs in 1 best of 3 against C9. 1 best of 3, and they were essentially set for the year. These guys haven't played a LAN outside of their home region ever. They're the first Thai players to ever get to a major, let alone an SI, which is awesome, but how they got here really just makes it seem like they kind of snuck in. I'm not saying that they won't be able to surprise some people. Like, in many ways, I consider them the APAC insanity stereotype personified, which will make it an interesting watch, but I'm not gonna put any expectations on them at all, and if they know what's good for them, they won't do that either. This is gonna be a phenomenal learning environment to take stock of their surroundings and come away with as much knowledge as they can. If they don't go far, it's honestly not that big of a deal, but they've been allergic to land so far in the past, and the way that they've gotten here is just so strange that the entire story of Elevate is going to make it an intriguing one to watch. So, out of the 4 APAC teams going to SI, you know the drill. This is how I would rank them currently. No grades, no additional justification, just the gut instinct that you develop after you spend too many of your waking hours watching this game. I do need a therapist after all. That is APAC's SI delegation. We'll do LATAM, Europe, and then North America in that order over the next couple of weeks. And yes, I am very aware about the stuff that XSET has done with their roster over the past 24 hours. So please go to the YouTube community tab on this channel if you want to weigh in on that, because I might feature some of those comments in a video. And otherwise, hit up my Twitter, my Twitch, and this YouTube channel for more roster and SI coverage over the next couple of weeks. I'll see you guys later. Peace. Sorry, I forgot.